Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside Government. This is a show brought to you by Keegan Community College and is shown on Spectrum, ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, as well as Verizon and Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. It is about 7 o'clock on the East Coast. Today is we're taping on Election Day, so you have about 2 hours to go to the polls if you have not voted. And just a reminder, we're going to end in about an hour with 2 shows. You still have an hour to watch television before you go get in line. But we are delighted to have as a non-political show today someone who's coming back to the studio, Dr. Adam Effler, who is the Executive Director of the Owasco Lake Management Council, Watershed Management Council. We're having him on to talk about what has been an extremely busy year since he was last on. Obviously, most of us have been hearing a lot about harmful algal blooms. We'll talk about that and how they've impacted the area that he's responsible for, but also have been part of a wider story in the region, especially with Skaneateles and people being concerned about that because of Onondaga County's drinking water. We're also going to be talking about the city's drinking water and its safety, as well as a lawsuit that the City of Auburn has brought against the state of New York. He's my science guy. We're not going to get too deep. This will be fun, like Bill Nye the Science Guy. But next week is the political side. City Councilor Terry Cuddy, who has been a longtime advocate, at least 3 decades that I can remember, on the lake, will be in here talking a little bit more about the lawsuit and what the city wants. But Doctor, welcome back to the studio.
It's my pleasure to be here, Guy.
Let's start with the most basic of every question that somebody wants to know. Is Auburn's water drinkable and safe today?
Absolutely. The drinking water is safe. Of course, the lake serves a drinking water consumer base of over 40,000 people. And the water purveyors, both the City of Auburn and Town of Owasco, take very seriously their role in ensuring a safe drinking water resource for the community.
So about a month ago, I think it was about a month ago, there were some neurotoxins discovered in some testing that the city does. Mm-hmm. First of all, I know that the city manager was on last week and he said there was a question about some of the samples, which is a different issue. But do you get to look at those tests, these neurotoxin tests, and were they high?
Right, so the toxins analysis is based on programming and a collaboration between the water purveyors, so both the city and the town of Owasco, and the Keegan County Department of Health.
So is it 3 tests or 1 test, and how many tests are there per week?
So essentially the protocol is such that in July, both purveyors start testing weekly. And if they...
Why July?
So,
explain why, and not every day, or not every week.
Of course.
Why not 52 weeks?
Of course, right. So there is a seasonality of phytoplankton, and in this case, cyanobacteria. And so the harmful algal bloom phenomenon does not initiate before July. Okay. So they're aware that it's potential to, there's potential there to have the occurrence of a harmful algal bloom and the associated toxins. And so that the sampling protocol gets underway for measuring the raw water. So that's the water at the intake. And if they see an elevation above 3 micrograms per liter, they start measuring the filtered water.
Okay.
Okay. And if they see the same value, which they have not yet seen, right? The purveyors are very effective at treating for microcystin. That's the prominent cyanotoxin in cyanobacteria. If they see the same value or level, 3 micrograms per liter in the finished water, the treated water, they would issue a 10-day do not drink order. And that's really EPA guidance. There is no regulation around that order, and there's yet to be a state protocol or regulation to handle this particular issue.
And on that do not drink for 10 days, the City of Auburn has not had that.
That has yet to happen.
Okay.
Yes.
Some towns and villages have had it because of issues within their system.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And we'll come back to the pipeline in a second. Does everybody draw out of the single pipeline that's
no.
Where does Owasco draw from?
Right, so Owasco's intake is further south along the east shore of the lake, and it's actually positioned somewhat deeper in the water column. There's been more recent discussions about the potential value perceived with having an intake that is situated deeper within the water column. We can talk more about that
Well, no,
later.
we'll talk about it now.
Yeah.
I mean, just from the perspective, since this all popped up during the summer, but also in context of you knew you were going to have July and August where you were having problems, but also in the context of what's going on with the state of New York and all this, the issue at the city has been, do you extend the pipe that's at the seawall out farther? So the seawall was rebuilt 25 years ago. Part of the seawall was rebuilt to preserve that pipe. And so how far does the pipe go out? Do you know?
It goes out farther than you would think. I don't know the exact distance offhand or the length of the pipe. It's very shallow on the north end of the lake, and so that pipe needs to go out rather far in order to get deep enough to draw water. So
this is the idea that you would go out farther. So
farther and deeper.
And so, well, A, would that solve a problem?
Okay, so that mitigation practice is considered a top-down control, right? So you're trying to mitigate a problem, in this case, the harmful algal blooms phenomenon and associated cyanotoxins, by drawing water further out in the lake, right? As opposed to a bottom-up solution, which is to tackle the drivers, otherwise known as the causes of the perturbation, of the habits themselves.
So your thought would be, forget the cost for a second, forget the logistics of the engineering. Going farther out, deeper, would, in essence, help the city with its water.
So it can.
Okay. No guarantees.
Well, there's no guarantees. So generally the thought with lowering an intake pipe is that lakes such as Owasco Lake, they stratify, meaning they layer. So there are three prominent layers. There's the hypolimnion, that's the lower layer, the metalimnion, and the epilimnion. Generally speaking, in large part, most of the productivity, including the production of algae and cyanobacteria, happens near the surface, up in that epilimnion area, right? So the thought is, generally speaking, that hypolimnion is cleaner water. However, when it comes to cyanobacteria, they have evolved in such a way that they are mobile throughout the water column. So they transport diurnally, so daily, up and down throughout the water column. They come up during the day to photosynthesize. They absorb that sunlight for reproduction, right? Continuing to produce and grow. And then they go down closer to the bottom. And there's some question as to whether or not during that diurnal cycle of transport that perhaps if they're lower in the water column, they may still be present if the pipe is deeper.
So it might not solve that.
It might not.
So where does the discussion stand right now? Because nobody's put a price tag on this, correct?
So there's yet to be an exact price tag.
Okay.
So yeah, there are a few different clean water planning processes that New York State brings to bear, generally considered pathways to funding, where local contingents, such as the Water Resource Management contingent for Owasco Lake, we can discuss the various approaches and strategies.
Would that be your office, or would that be the city, or everybody?
So that's a great question. So the clean water plan that has discussed more recently this top-down approach for extending the intake pipe into deeper water is the Drinking Water Source Protection Plan. Now, both purveyors decided they would leverage this because it was a planning process that the state brought to bear for communities for free through the provision of consultants that would work with those communities. So we said, we have our 9-element plan completed, but why wouldn't we take advantage of this program that's being brought to us? So in those more recent planning processes, we've discussed that top-down strategy.
And would that pay for everything?
Well, the plan doesn't pay for it, but what the reason these clean water plans are pathways for funding is that they are included within a clean water plan that then gets approved by New York State, so that when you write your project proposal pitch, you indicate where that that project was included within your clean water plan, and then you stand to score at a higher ranking within their ranking criteria for evaluating proposals.
And do you have any idea how much this would cost at this stage? Is there any?
I don't know where to start. I don't. Yeah, and
Okay.
I think that would be a better question for the city's engineer.
So could the city do this with, forget the funding for a second, because they always want to use somebody else's money, and we always do. We all do. We always want somebody else to pay for it on a whole host of things, but we won't get into that with you. But with that being said, separate from the money issue, where, like school districts like an 85% match, this institution likes a 50% match from SUNY, you always want some state money if you can get it, or some federal money.
That's correct.
Separate from that, if the money was not a question, could the city just do this on their own, or do they need permissions and permits along the way, separate from it's their pipe?
Yeah, I gather that there may be a permitting process working with New York State on such a large-scale project such as that. I can tell you that the monetary value, the dollar value, would be such that there would need to be state buy-in for this particular project. And I expect that there would be some local match, right, some cost share where the city would have to contribute at some level. But that would be an extraordinarily expensive project, and we would be looking for help from the state for that.
And with that, if you did the pipe, does that shut down the water system? And I know just east of here is a holding tank. I don't know how much that holds for the City of Auburn. Is that days or weeks? My instinct is not weeks.
That's a good question. Yeah, and I don't know.
I'm not going to tell everybody where it is, but it's over there. So
there would be some contingency planning involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to your work and,
Sure.
and what you're all doing. One last thing on the neurotoxins. The numbers have since dropped.
Yes, that's true. So both water purveyors have observed what they call non-detect for the last couple of weeks. So they have shut down their filtration processes. And they're both carbon-based processes. For the city, it's powder-activated carbon, and for the town of Owasco, it's granular activated carbon. But either way, what's unique...
Why wouldn't you do those all year round? Is it an expense issue?
It's very expensive.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's very expensive. What's unique about the cyanotoxin issue is that unlike bacterial issues that can be common when it comes to drinking water concerns, you can't just boil the water to get rid of these toxins, right? They require carbon filtration for removal. Yeah.
Okay. And Owasco's numbers were always much lower than the city's because of their intake and where it's located?
There's some thought that may be the case, that
Okay.
lower intake could help them, yes.
So for those who don't know, your service area for the Owasco watershed is what size and what's it cover?
Right, so the watershed's 208 square miles. We have 3 counties, primarily Cayuga County, of course. In fact, the entirety of the lake falls within Cayuga County. We have 3 notable industries. We have the ag industry, which is over 50% of the land use base. We have the forest land use, which is in the 40s, upper 40s. Believe it or not, only around 2 to 3% or so is residential development. So mostly agriculture.
And what do you consider forestry again?
The forest,
The
yeah.
forest,
So
okay.
forested
Green space.
lands.
Okay.
Yes, yep, green space.
And Owasco's watershed is larger than Skaneateles'.
So yes, but what's most important about that specification for Owasco is that the watershed is the largest watershed to lake ratio of any of the Finger Lakes. Right?
Say that again and explain that.
Okay, so the largest watershed, so again, the drainage basin, right, the size of the watershed, relative to the lake, so think big watershed, small lake, of all of the Finger Lakes, okay? So you have other Finger Lakes. For instance, Skaneateles is about 4 to 1, right?
Okay.
Ours is 20 to 1. And what that means is that we are very prone to the impacts of what they call non-point source pollution, or land use borne pollution. Pollution that comes from
Right.
the watershed and drains via stormwater runoff.
So obviously there was a lot of stories in late August about Skaneateles, as if harmful algal blooms never appeared before. I believe they had occurred before, but there have been, obviously that has a different system that services the city of Syracuse
That's
than
correct.
Auburn. Has the problem, because of all of the media attention on Skaneateles, driven more conversation about all of the Finger Lakes?
I believe there may be some truth there. You were correct that there have been harmful algal blooms observed on Skaneateles Lake in previous years. This has been a very tough year for us with regards to cyanobacteria and harmful algal blooms. I believe there's value in bringing attention to this issue because these are drinking water supplies. Right? This is a critical issue, critical water resource issue. And honestly, the harmful algal blooms phenomenon is not well understood. You know, even from the scientific perspective, those who research algae specifically, phytoplankton, how they reproduce, the harmful algal blooms have known drivers or causes, right? And the way those are identified is through what's called correlation analyses or regression analyses, right? So the extent to increases or decreases in one factor affect increases or decreases in another factor, right? So we understand that warming waters, that's an important issue, right? And the warming water pattern is increasing the duration of stratification. So the lakes are staying layered longer, and we know it's the end of that summer to fall layering period when these blooms tend to thrive.
So I just was reading a book called Wicked Plants, and I was surprised that one of the chapters is on harmful. This goes back millions of years. This is not where we may have been concentrating on it for the last 2 decades. This is a long-term issue.
Yes, well, of course. So
from a science perspective.
Yes, well, I mean, cyanobacteria, it's an ancient organism. I mean, it's been around since, as we understand it, the beginning of life on Earth.
Is there any way to kill it overall, where you don't damage?
Well, okay.
You can kill anything.
Right. Well, okay. So
unless it's a Steven Spielberg movie or something like that.
So broad scope, we don't want to kill cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is, in fact, one of the greatest sources of carbon sequestration. In fact, the #1 carbon sequesterer.
So it takes carbon out of the system.
It takes carbon out of the environment, right, okay, and stores
Which
it.
is a good
right?
thing.
Yep, exactly. It takes carbon out of our atmosphere and stores it, right? And so I think the layperson thinks, that's mostly trees, and trees are very important for that particular role. But cyanobacteria are important too. It's just this toxic form, this harmful form, has become a real issue for us.
So back to just this summer, when did the HABs appear earlier than normal?
It's not my understanding that they appeared earlier. It's that they were much more robust, much more frequent, and many, many more sightings were reported.
So they appear and they disappear?
Well, so they tend to set up at the surface, right? And
okay.
We talked earlier about that sort of diurnal transport cycle, right?
Great photo ops for news journalists.
That's true. That's true when they set up at the surface. So what they really prefer are those quiescent conditions, right? The very still surface waters, late summer into the fall. The water's still very warm, and that's when they're soaking up the rays, if you will, at the surface. Okay. Now, keep in mind, in terms of the numbers of harmful algal bloom occurrences, they're estimates based on citizen science reports. So volunteers, many of them are members of lake associations.
So it's just not you and your staff.
No, we also will report.
No, I know you do that, but it's just not you alone.
It's not just us.
Okay.
And so it is important to understand that there's something called sampler's bias, right? So if there are more people looking, there are more reports that will be found. So before this HABs phenomenon became such an issue, there were likely occurrences, but that were not being reported. So we're getting many reports, which is a good thing, and undoubtedly they're have been more and more occurrences, but you need to separate out the fact that there are more people looking, and so sometimes you have to be careful about how you document how many people are sharing their observations.
So, as we're on November 5th, what do you think the state of Owasco Lake is today? You've been here 6 years. You've been director for just about 6 years now.
That's correct.
Met you 6 years ago upstairs, so you had an office here. What's the state of Owasco Lake today? And you've been here 6 years. How has it progressed or digressed in that time period? If it digressed, it's not your fault.
I appreciate that, Guy. Yes, so these are pristine glacial lakes. I mean, these are very nutrient-poor lakes. And we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of nutrient reduction strategies to reduce the occurrences of harmful algal blooms, to reduce production in the lake. What's interesting about our challenges with lake water quality as they include this phenomenon, these cyanotoxins and the blooms themselves, is that the lake open water average phosphorus concentration. Now that phosphorus is the limiting nutrient. We've talked about this before. So the limiting nutrient is the nutrient in lowest quantity relative to an organism's need for growth, right? So it's usually a target for reduction because it's, or for reducing productivity in the lake, reducing algae growth, because it's the limiting nutrient for algae to grow. Does that make sense? It's a complicated concept.
So there's obviously this 9 elements plan, and we got about 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay,
So,
all right.
So give us a quick, non-technical, what's the 9 elements plan that's out there?
Okay, the 9-element plan for phosphorus reduction for the Owasco Lake watershed is a form of clean water planning that we've discussed that previously. We understand it's a pathway to funding through New York State. Within the plan, there are recommendations that have been outlined.
And this has been something that's been on the table and discussed for at least since you've been here.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Recently approved last year.
By
New York State.
Okay.
By New York State. Key County Planning Department played a lead role in helping us spearhead that particular project. The overarching findings and the findings and the recommendations for that particular plan came out of a model. And the model that was used was called the Soil and Water Assessment Tool. That particular model estimated that about 90% of the phosphorus loading to the lake is agriculture-derived phosphorus, right? So it's coming from the ag industry.
which they, by the way, dispute in some cases.
Well, I wouldn't say they in terms of, I don't want to placate the interest of all.
Some members of the agricultural community disagree with that finding.
Right, and they may also disagree with the extent to which that is important with regards to harmful algal blooms.
So now that you've got it approved, what does that mean? What does that allow you as the Management Council to do now?
Well, so that allows us to write grant proposals and to be positioned in such a way where we rank higher on scoring as the state reviews our project proposals, because of the fact that our proposals are outlined in the various strategies included within the plan.
So have you applied for monies since approved?
Yes, we have, yes.
And have you got any money?
Well, not from New York State per se. We've been very successful recently with federal funds.
Okay.
We have a $500,000 grant currently where we are working in collaboration with our partners for implementing stream restoration on the Owasco Inlet. So stream bank restoration projects.
And what will that do?
Well, the idea there is to reduce both sediment and nutrient runoff associated with the scouring and erosion of stream banks along the inlet.
Okay. And how long is that project and who's doing the work?
Well, it was scoped out as a 2-year project. We had some limitations on the permitting front just based on state agency review, so it will push out another year. So we're looking at about another 2 years or so on that project.
And do you have other submissions that you have on either have made submissions or you have things on the drawing board that you would like to go out there, and what's your next big project?
Absolutely, right. So there are a couple. We were successful with a collaborative submission with the City of Auburn as a partner. and for what's called the Stream Corridor Assessment Project. And what that is you essentially have, in this case, we'll probably work with a third party of some kind, come in, help us with the Stream Corridor Assessment. Based on our findings, the subsequent proposal is, this is where we need work along the stream corridor.
So when you say work along the stream corridor, what does that mean? What are you doing? Are you removing stuff? You're putting stuff in?
Yeah, so it's
putting new piping in?
It's
what are you doing?
usually erosion control mechanisms. There's sometimes riprap that's used along the banks to reduce continued scouring, to help stabilize those banks and reduce erosion. Sometimes soft practices. We've been working more closely and ever more closely with the Cayuga County Soil and Water Conservation District. And we are working with them to introduce more soft practices.
So you've mentioned a lot of agencies in the last 28 minutes.
Yes.
But this is, so is your role partially collaboration? We obviously
it's entirely collaboration.
So we had the Finger Lakes Land Trust last week.
Yes.
With Jim Walsh and Andy Zepp here. Obviously we're going to have city folks here. You talked about soil and water. You're all on the same page now.
Yes, collaboration
which may not have been the case a dozen years ago.
I believe that's true, yes.
And when I say not on the page, you were all over the place. Everybody was doing their own thing.
Yes, we are, well, and I believe that the Management Council is serving the role of providing a central hub for collaboration among all of these partners.
So a convening role as well.
Yes, right, where we can find common ground and come up with common solutions.
We're going to talk about the lawsuit and all that stuff next week with Councilor Cuddy.
Okay.
I want to ask you the general question I always ask you at the end of every interview we do. What's your biggest worry? What's out there on the watershed that you are most concerned about?
I would say my biggest concern regarding the watershed, as it relates to water quality for the lake, of course, is the extent to which the community, the watershed community, takes seriously our need to make change and to step up to the plate to protect the lake from cyanobacteria. There are certain issues when it comes to the environment that we don't know whether or not we're going to be able to make headway quickly enough to protect our resources, right? We know that about the climate, right? Are we going to be able to sequester carbon and handle greenhouse gases in such a way that we can slow down climate change rapidly enough? And I think that's also similar, just in a smaller scale for this lake. Are we going to step up to the plate? And let's be clear, there is resistance to change. There's a lot of great work that's happening. A lot of people have stepped up. Everyone cares about the lake, but when it comes to changing human behaviors, there's always a certain resistance to change.
You're going to fight the good fight. I'd love to have you back on. You've been very good about coming on once a year to just give us updates on this, and love to have you back on to give us a further update. We didn't get into lake inspections, everything else that you've been doing. Maybe we'll do that in spring just as a preview.
That sounds great. There's always much to discuss. So,
our guest has been Dr. Adam Effler, the Executive Director of the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council. We're delighted to have him in here to talk about what is going on with Owasco Lake and the quality of the water we have. We will, as I mentioned, have City Councilor Terry Cuddy in next week, who's been involved in water issues for at least 30 years that I can remember, to talk about not only the lake but also the city's interaction with the state on November 12th. We will be back in a moment with the Auburn Business Improvement District's Jesse Klein to give us an update about what is going on in the bid, especially what's coming up with their holidays in the next 3 weeks. And we'll be back on Thursday with 2 shows. We'll have Aileen McNabb-Coleman, the chair of the Cayuga County Legislature, in to give us a county update. We'll specifically be talking about their budget that goes into effect in about 55 days, as well as the status of the Cayuga County office building. We'll also have be on the front page. We have been talking about Micron all the time, and everyone mentions our Erie Canal moment. Well, the Erie Canal is 200 years old, and so we've asked the Erie Canal's Executive Director, Natalie Stenson, who used to work at the Seward House, and Derek Pratt, their Director of Education and Public Programs, to come on to talk about the 200th anniversary of the building of the canal, but also what great work they're doing in Onondaga County that you can go visit. So again, in the next couple of weeks, we'll have City Mayor Jimmy Giannantino in the studio. We'll have Auburn Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Misty Slavikin, as well as Kathleen Cuddy, the Director of the county's Health Department. If you'd like to let us know your ideas for guests or questions, you can send them at cozguytho@aol.com. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. You have about an hour and a half to vote if this is still Election Day, November 5th, but stick around for a conversation about the bid. We'll be about 30 minutes on that show as well.